Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I hope you're having a good day today. From today onwards, we will discuss some topics in the history of English literature. Learning history of English literature helps the students to gain high score in competitive examinations and interviews. In addition, learning history helps you a lot to appear and prepare for any type of interview. For me, learning history is fun, and through history, we know how people lived 100 years ago, how they thought, how they believed, and how they created their literature. We know their tradition, their culture, norms, and rich heritage when we study history. That's why history as a subject remains one of my favorite all the time. Let's begin our today's lecture in the history of English literature. So we will learn in today's class about the beginning of English history. We will begin from Anglo-Saxon period. So let's begin and learn the history of English literature with Muhammad Imran. So the Anglo-Saxon period formally begins 449, which is the end of 5th century, and it ends 1066, which is the middle of 11th century. So the Anglo-Saxon period begins 449 and it ends 1066. And the Middle Ages begin 1066 and they end in 1485. So through this chart, we will learn what was happening in England in 449 and what was happening around the world. So let's see. So in 449, we see that Germanic tribes invaded England. And here we see that in the world in 570 our beloved Prophet Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam he was born. And then here we can see that 597 what happens that Saint Augustine establishes monastery in Canterbury. And 683 what happens Empress Wu becomes the first woman to the China. And here we see that 787 Danish invasion begins on where that's also on England. And then 768 we see Charlemagne becomes king of France. Similarly in 871 we see Alfred the Great's rule begins. Now, before we discuss the invasion of Anglo-Saxon on Celts, we should know who were Celts and when did they arrive to England. So, in around 500 BC, two groups of Celts invaded British Isles. Now, Britons or Britons settled the island of Britain, while Gaels settled on Ireland and Picts settle in Scotland. So this was the arrival of Celt, or this was Celtic invasions on Britain. This is the map where you can see that Britain settled here, right, and Picts settled in Ireland, and Gaels settled in Scotland. So these were like the tribes which invaded Britain in almost 500 BCE. Almost 500 years later, when one of the most famous politician and general of Roman Empire, Julius Caesar, attacked on Britain and made it the part of the great Roman Empire. Then Britain remained the part of the great Roman Empire for almost 400 years. So you can see that the Roman occupied Britain in 1st century or 1st AD, right? And then it remained the part of the great Roman Empire till 499 when Anglo-Saxon attacked on Britain. So remember that first this part Britain, what is now Britain, it was occupied by Celt in 500 BCE. And then after 500 years in 1st century, it was occupied by Roman Empire, or Julius Caesar, who was one of the general and politician of the great Roman Empire and made it the part of the Roman Empire. And then when the Roman Empire gradually got decline in the 4th and 5th century, then Anglo-Saxon attacked on Britain and made it the part of Anglo-Saxon. So you can see that Ireland and Scotland were not the part of the great Roman Empire. Only Britain was the part of the great Roman Empire. You can see here where the Picts were settled and where the Gaels were settled. The Gaels settled in Scotland while the Picts settled in Ireland. So these parts were not like the part of the great Roman Empire. Only the Britain was the part of the great Roman Empire. Setting the scene. In the 5th century, the great Roman Empire was crumbling. It was on its decline. And in the 5th century, on the land of the Britain, Celts were living. And there were constant attacks from the barbarian, and these barbarian belonged to Irish tribes and Scottish tribes. So the Celt sent a request or a plea to the Council of Rome to save them from these barbarians, because these barbarians were driving them towards the sea, right? We're talking about the Celt people. The barbarians were not letting the Celt people to live peacefully in Britain. So they were driving them towards the sea, and the sea would drive or push them back towards the Britain. So they both sides there was death for them, because if they would live in Britain, so the barbarian would attack on them, and if the Celt people would go to the sea, so they may have drowned there. That's why the Celt people sent a request, a plea to the Council of the Rome to save them from these barbarians. But the Roman Empire excused, because it was fighting to save its own Roman Empire, and they did not have any spare soldiers to send and save the Celt people from the attack of these barbarians who belonged to Irish tribes and Scottish tribes. So I hope you got it. Let me summarize this. First, there were invasion of Celt people in 500 BCE on Britain. They came, they settled in Britain. And then in the 1st century, Britain was made the part of the great Roman Empire. And then it remained the part of the great Roman Empire for almost 500 years. And then there were constant attacks of the Irish and Scottish tribes on the Celt people. And then we will see that after these barbarian attacks, there would be the arrival of Anglo-Saxon tribes to Britain. Now, when the Roman Council couldn't help the Celt, so they asked help from Anglo-Saxon. Let's discuss it. Next, the Celt sought help from the Angle-Saxon and Jute tribes, who were the 3 tribes, and they were 3 Germanic tribes. So the Celt were seeking help from these tribes now to save them from Scottish and Irish barbarian. The Anglo-Saxon warriors, clothed in animal skins and wielding spears, drove the Celt into the mountains and took the land for their own. Now, you see that the Celt people wanted help from Angle-Saxon and Jute tribes, but Angle-Saxon and Jute tribes found this an opportunity to take over the Britain. They came here and they did not drive back barbarian from the Britain, but they themselves occupy. So you see, it's very interesting that the Celt people want these 3 tribes to come and save them from these barbarian. But these 3 tribes came and they took over the Britain and pushed the sail towards the mountain, right? This is very interesting, right? And then there was a very bloody beginning of the English history, because most of the Celt people were slain or they were killed. So it was a bloody beginning for the nation that would come to be known as England. This is the map where you can see three Germanic tribes. The yellow one shows Angles. This is Germanic tribes came and attacked on Britain. And the blue one shows that Jutes, right, came and attacked on West. And the third one, that is Saxon. You can see it came and attacked on East Anglia. So we can say that the Angles attack on Northumbria and Mercia. And the second one, that is Jutes, they attacked on Wessex. And the third one, Saxon, attack on East Anglia. History of the time. The Anglo-Saxon period, which formally begins in the middle of the 5th century and it ends in the middle of 11th century. Many consider that English history began with the invasion of the Angles, Saxon and Jutes in 449. So that is the middle of the 5th century. These Germanic invaders took over the southeastern part of the island and called it Angle Land, which later on became England. So Angle Land and England. They formed small tribal kingdom whose members lacked written language, supported themselves through farming and hunting, and believed in many different gods. So that was the beginning of Anglo-Saxon period. The coming of Christianity. How Christianity arrived to England. Christianity arrived to England by missionaries in the year 596. So it was the end of the 6th century when missionaries tried to convert the people of England. We're talking about Anglo-Saxon to Christianity. And then within 50 years, we see that almost all the England became Christian. Still, there were many held on their pagan's belief and tradition. But we can say that Christianity arrived to Anglo-Saxon by missionaries. And these Christian missionaries tried to convert Anglo-Saxon to Christianity. And they succeeded in the year 650 when most of the England became Christian. Now Britain or England became a Christian state. The Danish invasions. There would be some more invasion from Germanic tribes, and now these invaders belong to Denmark and Norway. So the people of Danes belong to Denmark and the people of Norsemen belong to Norway. So in the 8th and 9th century, these Germanic tribes attack on Britain, and in the 9th century, most of the England fall under these invaders. Then what happened? There's a dramatic situation when one of the king, Anglo-Saxon king, his name was Alfred. Alfred, the Saxon king of Wessex, led his warrior to victory over the Danes in the Battle of Edington. That battle was fought in 878. So he was the king of Anglo-Saxon. Alfred and then his son and great son occupied all the England, followed by a complete peace. When Alfred and his son and grandson occupied all the England, so there was a complete peace for a time in England. So the England which was occupied by Danes and Norsemen was once again won by Alfred, who was the Saxon king of Wessex. Because we talk about that there were three different kinds of tribes: Angle, Saxon and Jutes. So Alfred belonged to Saxon king. and he was the ruler of Wessex, and he attacked and he drove back these Norsemen and Danes, and there was a battle, and that battle fought in 878, and it is known as Edington. And then later on, his son and grandsons, they occupied all the England, and then there was peace in England. This is the map where you can see that the Danes and the Norsemen attacked on Britain. And here we can see Wessex, and the great king of Wessex was Alfred. And it was Alfred that who defeated Danes and Norsemen in 807-8. And that was Edington. The Middle Ages. The last king of Anglo-Saxon was Edward. When Edward died in 1066, it was actually the end of Anglo-Saxon period. Now the Duke of Normandy, which nowadays is France. So the Duke of Normandy laid claim to the English throne. He claimed that England belonged to them. When the English Council of Elders chose Harold II as the king, the Duke retaliated by attacking and defeating the Anglo-Saxon at the Battle of Hastings, and emerging as the England's first Norman king, that is known as William I. So William I was the first Normandy king. He belonged to France, right? So when the English councils or the elder of English council chose Harold II as the king of England, so what happened? The Duke retaliated by taking and defeating the Anglo-Saxon at the Battle of Hastings. You can see that is Harold II when he was nominated as the king of Anglo-Saxon after the death of Edward. But the Duke of Normandy couldn't accept him as a king, and he attacked and defeated Anglo-Saxon at the Battle of Hastings. And he emerged the first Norman king, and his name was William I. Here you can see William I, who became the king of England after the defeat of Anglo-Saxon, and he was the first king of Normandy. So Battle of Hastings, he defeated Anglo-Saxon in the Battle of Hastings. And here you can see Normandy. Merging cultures. When William I, who belonged to Normandy, France, and he became the first king of England, so then we can see the merge of England and French culture. So England and French culture merged. Though the Anglo-Saxon culture was solid, England assimilated many French influences, including feudalism and chivalry. So chivalry and feudalism came to England from France, and that is because of the first French king William I. Under feudalism, land was parceled out to lords who supported the Norman king, and these lords granted land to vassals in exchange for an oath of military duty. According to the code of chivalry, knights swore to be honorable, generous, brave, skillful in battle, respectful to women, and helpful to the weak. Now, under the feudal system, the whole land belonged to the Norman king, and the Norman king would give the land to the lords or the nobleman, and the nobleman in return would give support and money to the king. And then the land would be given to the vassal by the lords, and then the vassal would give the land to the knight, and then the knight would give the land to the working class. So this was like the feudal system. Like in other class we will talk in detail about the feudal system, but right now we will say that the feudalism and the chivalry came to England from France. Moving towards a new era. The 14th century was a dark time in England's history. Edward III war against France, the Black Death killed almost a third of England's people, and rival Pope caused a decline in respect for the church. But towns and cities continued to grow and the feudal system was fading. A new era was approaching. This new era was known as Renaissance. So this was an introduction to Anglo-Saxon period, which was followed by Middle Ages. In the coming lecture, we will talk in detail about Anglo-Saxon period and Anglo-Saxon literature. So keep watching and enjoy learning with Muhammad Imran. Please give me your feedback, and your suggestion would encourage me to upload more videos in the history of English literature. So if you are interested in the history of English literature, so please leave your comments, then I will upload more videos in the history of English literature. Thank you so much for watching and listening this video.